some space should continue to be left for religious exemptions to vaccinations?
In a pandemic, religious exemption should be questioned.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's program. My name is Andrea Luxton, and I'm our moderator for today. We have a group of panelists here, and I'm like them to introduce themselves.
I'm Tom Plumbley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve as the minister of First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Carl TROVALL. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
My name is Mel ROBECK. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
Welcome to all our panelists, and we have an interesting conversation today. Since the use of COVID vaccines has moved from emergency status to fully approved status, the pressure is on for the unvaccinated to be vaccinated. Many universities now require all students to show proof of vaccination. The President has mandated that all military personnel be vaccinated. Many businesses require proof of vaccination of regularly mandated testing. Still, there are many who continue to resist any vaccine despite its demonstrated safety. Several reasons are given. For instance, there are people with immune issues who need to be careful. Others claim a religious exemption, believing that the vaccines are built on stem cells from aborted fetuses. Others claim a religious exemption because they are either afraid to be vaccinated or they are victims of some conspiracy theory. Some pastors have developed form letters allowing their members to fill in their names. One federal judge even declared that veganism is religion, so vegans can be exempt. We would like to hear how our panelists think about current religious exemptions. So here are a few questions. First question is, do you believe that religious exemptions for vaccinations in a pandemic have a valid place? Secondly, what grounds would you consider as a valid basis for a religious exemption during a pandemic? And finally, how should those who abuse religious exemptions be treated? We'll go back to those who started our conversation.
Thank you. I believe that religious exemptions are important. I think they are being taken advantage of in this context. I think there should be a place for religious exemptions, but they should only be given in circumstances where people can demonstrate that an identifiable religious tradition has made some statement against this sort of vaccine. There are no major religious groups who oppose vaccinations in general or COVID vaccinations in particular. Even those churches that are, and other religious groups that are firmly against abortion have not come out against COVID vaccinations. The vaccines do not contain fetal cells. Fetal cells are used in the development of them, but then fetal cells are used in the development of all sorts of things. So, you know, if one has a religious scruple that keeps them from being vaccinated for COVID, they should probably not take Tylenol or ibuprofen or Tums for their tummy or just about any laxative, Pepto-Bismol, aspirin. All these things are in the development stage and in the testing stage involve the use of fetal cells. So what I'm saying is that I think it's a shame that people are using religion as a crutch. I am old enough to remember the days when we had a military draft, and it was important to have a military exemption possibility, a conscientious objector status that was available for that. But in order to do that, one had to appear before a draft board. One had to state in writing or orally or by the use of witnesses how they arrived at this particular belief and how it influenced the rest of their lives. And then the draft board made the decision about whether to allow that person to be a conscientious objector. And in fact, actually, that's still the law for those who must register for the draft. Vaccination is about personal responsibility. It's about being part of creating a healthier society, maintaining the health of society. It's about keeping people from dying. Yes, there may be religious groups that think that that's wrong, but the limits for religious exemptions for vaccinations, religious exemptions need to remain. They just need to be severely limited.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I agree with you, but I just don't think that there should be religious exemptions. I don't, because let me explain. I believe that God uses the natural process of doctors to help heal us and nurses in the medical establishment that we have. Are they perfect? No, they're not perfect, but that it isn't as if there are two tracks that God heals people on and you can choose which one you want. The way that I think is obligatory for everyone is to do the natural track under tested medical conditions, which would include a lot of our vaccines. And so I don't think that there's say, well, I don't believe in that way of doing it, so I'm just going to pray to God. Now, that could be an individual decision. I get that. But I don't think any community of faith can just say, well, we're going to exempt people from going to the doctor for this particular thing or to address this particular issue or whatever. I don't even understand that exactly even. And in other words, I think that every individual has the freedom of conscience to make their own decision, but I think that decision shouldn't be based just strictly on their religion, but it should be based on medical science. In other words, medical science and medical ethics already gives people, the principle of autonomy means that you are responsible for weighing the risks and the benefits of a particular thing for yourself. You should make a judgment on that basis and not use religion as a cover for making that decision. I mean, there are people who shouldn't receive the vaccine for certain medical reasons, as I understand. So that would be a wise decision, but there shouldn't be a medical exemption for that. That's their personal conscience. Obviously, there's also consequence. I mean, in civil disobedience, if you go against something, you have to say, I'm willing to pay the price of whatever my freedom of conscience was. But I think the other pieces which you also touched on are critical, particularly for faith communities, and that is any kind of medical procedure should not do no harm. In other words, there should be no intentional harm done. Now, there's always harm, right? You do surgery, there's harm done. But the point is that you have an ultimate good as a result from the harm. So that's individual. But there's also beneficence, meaning that you also have an obligation to do good for your neighbors. And so I don't think there should be a general religious exemption from people helping other people by getting vaccinated and thus loving their neighbor in that way. And I mean, the last criteria for medical ethics is justice, and you have to make sure the procedure is just. So to me, it's a medical decision based on individual conscience in counsel with your pastor or your priest or your rabbi or your religious leader. But I just don't believe in religious exemptions in this case at all.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that the question that you both have touched on, which is part of the reason that I really wrestle with this kind of a question, is what are vaccines for? And in some ways you say, well, a vaccine is for me, so that I individually am protected from getting a dreaded disease, whether it's measles, mumps, rubella, whatever it would be, in this case COVID-19, which we know is a potentially fatal and certainly very, very detrimental disease. But a vaccine is not just about protecting me. It's also protecting all the other people that I might infect if I contract that disease and then spread it because I'm now a carrier of that virus. And so it sort of goes back 2,000 years, where Hillel says in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers in the Mishnah, Im ein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Uchshe'ani la'atzmi ma'ani, but if I'm only for myself, then what am I? These questions of sort of worrying about my own individual needs versus the larger societal needs are, I think, the most important of religious questions. And ultimately, what I sort of wonder about is, when people talk about a religious exemption, what is it that you could believe that would exempt you from getting a vaccine that has the potential to protect your life and the lives of other people? And most of what I've heard from people who are searching for religious exemptions, it's coming from a place of misinformation, it's coming from a place of fear, it's coming from a place of ignorance about how is a vaccine actually made, how is the vaccine actually tested, how is the vaccine actually vetted, and what does it actually do to protect you. If you could remove all of those veils that keep us from truly understanding how this amazing science works that protects us, then I think we would probably see a very rapid decline in people seeking any kind of exemption, but certainly a religious exemption.
Well, I agree with what all of you have said. First of all, I am very thankful for the fact that we have religious exemptions on anything. And I would say the Selective Service is one place where I'm very happy to know that there is a place where a person can say, for conscience sake, for religious sake, I will not carry an arm. Can do other things, you know, and many of them ended up as hospital corpsmen and so forth. So, you know, I think there are alternatives to that, and I think I'm thankful for that. I also, you know, I'm a little bit nervous about exemptions in courts, but in courts, you know, you have the right to affirm instead of swearing that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's because there's a passage in Scripture that talks about swearing, and you're not supposed to swear. But I think that's taken out of context and misunderstood and misapplied and so forth. But what's interesting to me is that the very first vaccination was performed by Cotton Mather, a minister, a Puritan minister, who came up with the smallpox vaccine. Now, there was a lot of fighting back and forth about whether this should be done or, you know, whatever. But he changed the course of history in that vaccine, and we've had vaccines ever since. And there have been times in history when people have said, I will not do that for conscience sake, in large part because of the way it was made or something. But I agree with you, Dan, that the big issues right now are fear and ignorance and the lack of trust. And I think it's the lack of trust that's the biggest one. Because we have a history in this country of mandating certain things or of saying we're doing certain things when we're not, such as the African American men who became infected with syphilis through a program when in fact they had been told that they were finding a cure for this.
Tuskegee.
Yeah, in Tuskegee, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you have that kind of thing, and that's raised a lot of fear in some people. But it's a lack of trust, and I would say it's a lack of trust also because of the way it was implemented. You know, you have a president who says, oh, it's nothing, you know, and then all of a sudden he's wanting to get a, you know, different kind of a treatment, and then you have another president come along and, you know, he's speeding things up, and you know, people just don't trust this kind of pressure tactic, if you would. It's like a sales pitch that's gone a little bit too far. And I don't think that what we have done is wrong. I mean, I am very much a supporter of vaccines and the need for people to conform in this instance precisely because we have to, they are our neighbors. We need to take care of the people around us, and that's the best way to do it. And my wife's lost 2 cousins through this, and I had a brother that was very sick with it. So, you know, it comes home. But the reality is, I think a lot of our people are ignorant, and you know, I have to say, sometimes it's self-imposed. Sometimes it's because of watching too much television or listening to too many diatribes on social media and so forth. So, you know, there are lots of reasons, and it stirs up fear in them over whether this should be done or shouldn't be done. Nobody in the U.S. likes to have anybody tell them what to do. We're going to flaunt our independence come hell or high water. And I think that's where we are.
Ah, the great irony.
Yeah.
Because you can't survive without society.
That's right.
Humans all by themselves can't survive.
We love this freedom, but we don't want to be responsible.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is unfortunate about the current situation is that the responsibility is falling on employers to make the decision about whether someone's stated religious belief is true or not, or is valid or not. And that's a tough place to put an employer in. I mean, like anybody who employs more than 100 people can be subject to that, having to make that kind of decision, and that shouldn't be where the decision is made.
I think about also so much in our tradition that talks about our responsibility to do what we can to help save a life. Yeah. You know, in the book of Leviticus, we're taught, Al ta'amod al dam re'echa, don't stand by while your neighbor bleeds. Right? Lo tuchal lehitalem, you're not allowed to remain indifferent. There is in rabbinic tradition the idea that you're supposed to set aside all kinds of prohibitions if you can save a life. Because as they say in the Mishnah, the reason why a single human life was created was because a single human life is of ultimate value. And it's an entire world. And so you think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've died from this virus. Parents, children, individuals, and the precious value of each and every one of those lives. And the thought that I could do something that's going to give me a little bit of pain in my arm and maybe a little bit of a temperature for a couple hours, but could allow me to prevent someone from having a deadly illness, I think it's a small price to be asked to pay to protect our society.
Thank you. Mel, final comment?
Yes, I was going to say it's difficult to assess the seriousness of any person's religious conviction. And that's why the government has such a very difficult time deciding whether or not this is legitimate or not. But when I watch and say 35% of the police force in Los Angeles is looking for religious exemption, I have to say, I don't think they're religious. I think they're finding a way out.
Thank you. All right, time for a break. Thank you very much.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, everybody, and now you know where we are. You know how to get hold of us. You can find us easily, and we would love, of course, to hear from you. But back now to our panelists for their closing statements.
Thank you. Religious freedom is the bedrock of our democracy, and it is the bedrock of this television program. But religious freedom is not a license to do harm. It is more than a shame when personal irresponsibility causes young folk and old folk alike to die or to fill up hospitals and make healthcare workers fly in emergency teams all over the country like they do toward natural disasters. But this is no longer a natural disaster. This has become a human-created disaster because of our willful ignorance and stubbornness to get away from vaccines. If we reacted in previous times like we are doing now to this vaccine, we would still be fighting the Spanish flu and we would still be fighting polio.
And smallpox.
I want to read from Martin Luther's 1527 letter, whether one may flee from a deadly plague. This is 1527. Others are much too rash and reckless, tempting God and disregarding everything which might counteract death and the plague. They disdain the use of medicines. They do not avoid places and persons infected by the plague, but lightheartedly make sport of it and wish to prove how independent they are. They say that it is God's punishment. If He wants to protect them, He can do so without medicines or carefulness. This is not trusting God, but tempting Him. God has created medicines and provided us with intelligence to guard and take good care of the body so that we can live in good health. It is even more shameful for a person to pay no heed to his own body and to fail to protect it against the plague, the best he is able, and then to infect and poison others who might have remained alive if he had taken care of his body as he should have. He is thus responsible before God for his neighbor's death and is a murderer many times over. Indeed, such persons behave as though a house were burning in the city and nobody were trying to put the fire out. Instead, they give leeway to the flames so that the whole city is consumed, saying that if God so willed, He could save the city without water to quench the fire.
Well, that's strong.
But he's just a socialist.
He's just a socialist.
Well, the reality is Martin Luther had a lot of good things to say about fleeing the plague and working in the plague. You know, I had one of his quotes, I wish I'd thought to bring it, but one of his quotes outside my office when this first broke out, because what he basically said is, I'm not going to flee, I'm going to help people out and so forth, you know. So, and I think that's really an important part of the Christian tradition. You know, is that's part of what we're called to be. But I need to ask the people who, not so much are anti-vaxxers, but people who are relying on the religious exemption to say, I don't have to do that. You know, sooner or later, we're going to come under judgment for the kinds of decisions that we make. And religious exemptions, which are gained without religious commitment, I think brings a real kind of a future judgment to the decision that we've made. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be.
In most of the conversations I've had with religious leaders across the spectrum of Jewish belief and across the spectrum of general religious belief is not only have I yet to find a religious tradition that says you shouldn't be vaccinated, I have yet to find a religious tradition that says anything but you should be vaccinated. You know, not to sort of claim one-upsmanship, but a few hundred years before Martin Luther, Maimonides issued almost exactly the same statement, where he said, the Holy One created these amazing materials and elements and compounds and gave us the wisdom to know how to mix them, to have them made into medicines, and it's in violation of God's design for us to refuse to use them. Now, of course, he was somewhat prejudiced because Maimonides was a physician. But at the same time, I think, I really am mindful that there are certainly occasions when the carve-out for a religious exemption is important, especially as we've talked about with military service. But that doesn't obviate someone from participating in the collective good. So even if I claim conscientious objector status, that doesn't mean I just get to go and do what I want.
Right.
It means that I have to find another way to serve the common good. And I think that it's the common good that vaccines seek to help us to fashion in our society. And for a little bit of pain in the arm for a day, and maybe even a little bit of a chill for a few hours, the idea that I could prevent my friends who are physicians and nurses in a hospital setting, or God forbid someone who can't be vaccinated because of immunocompromisation, to me is a very small price to ask any of us to pay.
Well, thank you all very much. I am sure those of you who are listening have many views on this perspective, and I think we probably had a pretty strong and pretty unified position here. And I'd just like to add to this that I do think that irrespective of what we have heard today, there is a point at which I think the biggest challenge that I've experienced out there in this is how angry we get with each other over the decisions we make on this issue. And so I would suggest that is something at least that we need to consider and be loving towards each other, irrespective of the decisions. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week, at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.